Nobunaga had taken complete control of central Japan, and by this point, there were only a few forces left that could stand in his way. To the west, the Mori clan. To the east, the Hojo clan. And to the north, what remained of the Wasugi forces. With his overwhelming economic power and military strength, conquering these remaining enemies and unifying all of Japan was just a matter of time. So Nobunaga made a bold move. He launched a massive simultaneous invasion on all fronts, sending his most elite commanders in every direction. To the west, he sent Hashiba Hideyoshi as supreme commander. To the east, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and to the north, Shibata Katsui. This was the all-out push for total unification. When Hideyoshi's army of 30,000 crossed into the western frontier, the local daimyo, the regional warlords who ruled their own territories, were thrown into absolute chaos. The Mori clan, one of the oldest and most powerful families in the West, was right on their border. Betraying a neighbor that strong was not something you did lightly. But then, one man walked into Hideyoshi's camp and changed everything. His name was Kuroda Kanbei, and what he offered was nothing short of jaw-dropping. He told Hideyoshi that he would hand over Miki Castle, his own home fortress and the strongest stronghold in Harima province, to serve as the supreme headquarters for the entire Western campaign. Not just the castle, everything inside it, all the food supplies, all the soldiers, everything. He was giving it all to Hideyoshi. It was a truly extraordinary offer, and Kanbei's gamble paid off immediately. Without fighting a single battle, Hideyoshi now had a perfect forward base right in the heart of enemy territory. When word spread that Kanbei, one of the most powerful men in the region, had submitted to Hideyoshi, the other local lords who had been nervously watching from the sidelines started lining up to surrender. Kanbei's one bold decision created a domino effect. Hideyoshi secured a rock-solid foothold for the Western campaign without spilling a single drop of blood. But more important than all of this was the fact that Hideyoshi had gained Kuroda Kanbei himself. Hideyoshi was completely captivated by this man's vision and fearless judgment. He immediately made Kanbei his top advisor. With his base of operations secured, Hideyoshi began conquering the West. But he did not do it with simple military force. He used strategies that were both ruthless and cunning, testing the very limits of human endurance. It was war waged as a terrifying art form. His first target was Miki Castle in Harima. The lord of this castle had allied with the Mori clan and rebelled against Nobunaga. Miki Castle was a fortress built on a mountain, and a direct assault would have meant devastating casualties. So Hideyoshi pulled out a weapon no one saw coming: time and hunger. Instead of attacking the castle, Hideyoshi built a massive ring of siege fortifications around it. He constructed earthen walls and watchtowers, completely cutting Miki Castle off from the outside world. Not a single grain of rice, not a pinch of salt could get through. He sealed it so tight that not even an ant could slip past. This was the beginning of what the Japanese called Hoshigoroshi, which literally means starving them to death. The siege lasted nearly 2 years, and inside those walls, it was pure hell. First, they slaughtered and ate their war horses. Then they survived on grass roots and tree bark. And eventually, according to historical records, the starving people inside began to eat each other. Finally, the castle lord, Besho Nagaharu, could not bear to watch his people suffer any longer. He struck a deal. He would take his own life in exchange for the survival of the soldiers and civilians inside the castle. He committed seppuku, the ritualistic suicide considered the ultimate expression of honor among samurai warriors. Hideyoshi had taken one of the most heavily fortified castles in the region with minimal casualties on his side. This brutal yet devastatingly effective strategy carved Hideyoshi's name into the minds of every warlord across Japan. After Miki Castle fell, Hideyoshi turned his sights on Tottori Castle, and here, his strategy became even more devious and calculated. This time, he decided to eliminate the enemy's food supply before the siege even began. Months before surrounding the castle, Hideyoshi sent agents to buy up every grain of rice in the region at prices far above market value. The rice merchants had no idea what was really happening and were thrilled, thinking they had made a fortune. But this was a terrifying trap that Hideyoshi had laid for them. When the siege of Tottori Castle began, there was virtually no rice left inside. And to make matters even worse, the local peasants, who had sold all their food for the inflated prices, now fled into the castle to escape the coming war. So the castle was packed with extra mouths to feed and had almost nothing to feed them with. It was the worst possible situation. The result was even more horrifying than Miki Castle. In just 4 months, the castle had become a living hell. In the end, the castle lord, Kikuatsuni, chose to sacrifice himself to save his people. He too committed seppuku. Once again, Hideyoshi had destroyed an enemy, not with swords, but with economics and psychology. By 1582, Hideyoshi had finally reached the doorstep of the Mori clan's home territory. Only one obstacle remained: Bitchu Takamatsu Castle. Take this castle, and he could quickly advance straight into the Mori heartland. But Bitchu Takamatsu Castle was a fortress built on a swamp, making it virtually impregnable. And here, the starvation strategy would not work either. So Hideyoshi executed the most audacious and grand-scale operation in the entire history of the Sengoku period, Japan's age of warring states. In just 12 days, Hideyoshi's men constructed a massive dam, 3 kilometers long and 7 meters high, blocking the Ashimori River that flowed near the castle. It was an engineering feat that seemed almost impossible with the technology of that era. When the rainy season arrived, the swollen river, now blocked by the dam, reversed course and flooded the plains. Bitchu Takamatsu Castle was turned into an island, sitting in the middle of a giant lake. The brutal starvation siege of Miki Castle, the diabolical economic warfare at Tottori Castle, and now the legendary flooding of Bitchu Takamatsu Castle. Behind every one of Hideyoshi's genius strategies, there was always the razor-sharp mind of Kuroda Kanbei at work. With his castle submerged and on the verge of collapse, the head of the Mori clan, Mori Terumoto, made a desperate decision. He staked the fate of his clan and personally led a massive relief army of 50,000 troops. Hideyoshi had prepared strong defensive positions using his dam and fortifications. But if the Mori army launched an all-out assault, the outcome was far from certain. A defeat here could send the entire Western campaign up in smoke. So Hideyoshi sent an urgent request for reinforcements to his lord, Nobunaga. His calculation was simple. Once Nobunaga's forces arrived, they would have such an overwhelming advantage that the Mori clan would be completely annihilated. But Hideyoshi was not just a brilliant strategist. He was a genius at reading people and playing politics. He did not want to make this moment solely his own achievement. In his letter to Nobunaga, he wrote something along the lines of, "The feast has already been prepared. All that remains is for my lord to come in person and claim the final victory." This was not a plea saying, "I am struggling, please help me." This was an offering from a loyal Kashin saying, "Please come and personally write the final chapter of national unification." Hideyoshi knew that Nobunaga always wanted to be at the center of every important victory. By giving Nobunaga the most glorious moment, Hideyoshi could have his achievements recognized while also strengthening his lord's favor. And there was another layer to this. If Hideyoshi had single-handedly forced the entire Mori clan to submit, his achievement would have become too enormous within the Oda clan, inviting jealousy and interference from other Kashindan. But by creating the appearance that we could only win thanks to our lord's reinforcements, Hideyoshi cleverly avoided that political burden and protected his own safety. It was a brilliantly calculated move. Hideyoshi's request for reinforcements was simultaneously a practical military decision to break through a crisis and a masterstroke of political calculation to elevate his lord's glory while solidifying his own position. At that very moment, back at Nobunaga's grand stronghold of Azuchi Castle, a lavish banquet had been going on for days. It was a celebration to honor Tokugawa Ieyasu, Nobunaga's most trusted ally, who had played the biggest role in the recent destruction of the Takeda clan, one of Nobunaga's most hated enemies. Nobunaga mobilized every luxury imaginable to display his power and wealth. The rarest delicacies from across Japan were served endlessly, and every plate and cup was made of gold or expensive foreign goods from the West. This was not just a celebration. It was an overwhelming political performance designed to impress upon Ieyasu and every daimyo in the land who the true ruler really was. And the man in charge of this historic banquet was Akechi Mitsuhide, the highest-ranking and most elite kashin in the entire Oda clan. Being chosen as the host of this event was a tremendous honor, a symbol of just how deeply Nobunaga trusted him. But fate was not kind to Akechi Mitsuhide. Spoiled fish was served during the banquet. Nobunaga was furious. In front of everyone, he publicly berated and humiliated Mitsuhide, even kicking him. For Mitsuhide, a man who always pursued perfection and had immense pride, this was a pain worse than being cut with a sword, an unforgivable humiliation that could never be washed away. And then, right at that moment, a messenger arrived at Miki Castle carrying Hideyoshi's letter. The message was clear and direct. "I am facing the Mori main army. I humbly request that my lord come in person to finish this final great task." Nobunaga immediately stripped Mitsuhide of his role as banquet host and issued a new order. Mitsuhide was to take his army and march west at once to support Hideyoshi in the attack on the Mori clan. Mitsuhide had been cast out of the most prestigious position and ordered to serve under Hideyoshi, a man he had always looked down upon. It was effectively a demotion. Nobunaga then sent his ally Ieyasu off on a sightseeing trip to the merchant city of Sakai. After that, Nobunaga himself moved to Kyoto to assemble his forces, planning to personally march west and join Hideyoshi. While preparing his army for the western campaign, Nobunaga took up residence at Honnō-ji, a temple in Kyoto. At that same time, Akechi Mitsuhide, who had received Nobunaga's order to march west as reinforcements for Hideyoshi, departed from his home castle of Kameyama with an army of 13,000 men. His troops were heading west toward Hideyoshi's position. But when they reached the outskirts of Kyoto, near the Katsura River, Mitsuhide suddenly halted the march and shouted to his men, "All units change course to Kyoto. Our Lord Nobunaga wishes to inspect the army before we depart. March with pride and show him our strength at the military review." Mitsuhide's army cut through the dark streets of Kyoto in the dead of night. And when they arrived at Honnō-ji, Mitsuhide gave the order to his soldiers. "The enemy is at Honnō-ji." His soldiers, who had believed they were simply marching to a military review for their lord, suddenly found themselves, without even understanding what was happening, pointing their guns at the very place where Nobunaga was staying. Why did Akechi Mitsuhide betray Nobunaga? This is one of the greatest mysteries in all of Japanese history. Even after more than 400 years, history still cannot give a clear answer to this single question. Akechi Mitsuhide was, without question, the most outstanding elite among all of Nobunaga's generals. He was not just a warrior, he was a deeply cultured intellectual with exceptional administrative skills. He was Nobunaga's sword, his shield, and his brain. Their relationship was not a simple lord and retainer bond. They looked like partners working together to achieve the great task of unifying Japan. There are several theories about why Mitsuhide betrayed him. The first is the grudge theory. Nobunaga's cruel and unpredictable personality had repeatedly crushed Mitsuhide's pride. When Mitsuhide was overseeing the banquet for Tokugawa Ieyasu and a problem arose with the food he had prepared, Nobunaga berated him and even kicked him in front of everyone. The pride of this top elite was shattered to pieces. The second is the ambition theory. Mitsuhide was no fool. He could read the situation with cold precision. At that exact moment, Nobunaga was staying at Honnō-ji with only about 100 guards. Hideyoshi was pinned down in the west, fighting the Mori. Shibata Katsuyi was stuck in the north, fighting the Wasugi. Every single one of the Oda clan's main armies was far from the capital. It was the perfect opportunity to strike Nobunaga. According to this theory, Mitsuhide believed he could seize power for himself and made the biggest gamble of his life. The third is the fear theory. Nobunaga valued capable men, but the moment they lost their usefulness or displeased him, he would discard them without mercy. He was a ruthless lord. Mitsuhide had watched with his own eyes as several senior Kashin were purged for dubious reasons, especially after the Banquet incident. When Nobunaga ordered him to serve under Hideyoshi, it was effectively a demotion. Mitsuhide may have sensed it. My time is over. I will be purged next. So, according to this theory, he drew his sword first in order to survive. Dawn broke on June 21st, 1582. Nobunaga was jolted awake by the sounds of war cries and gunfire erupting from every direction. At first, he thought it was a petty quarrel among his men. But the moment he saw the rain of arrows and the banners of the Akechi, he understood everything instantly. Honnō-ji was more than a simple temple. It had been fortified like a small castle, but the guards protecting Nobunaga numbered only about 100. In this desperate situation, Nobunaga is said to have quietly murmured, "There is no help for it." Nobunaga grabbed a spear and fought back himself. But the difference in numbers was simply too overwhelming. There was no chance of winning. When a bullet tore through his left shoulder, the wounded Nobunaga walked into the deepest chamber of the burning temple. He refused to let his head fall into enemy hands, the worst humiliation possible. He locked the doors behind him, and there, surrounded by flames, he committed seppuku. He was 49 years old. Oda Nobunaga, the man who had been just one step away from unifying all of Japan, departed from the Sengoku period. Just like that, in the most fleeting and hollow of ways. In the Sengoku period, Nobunaga was a revolutionary. He did not care about birth or tradition. He promoted people based on ability alone. He took Hideyoshi, the son of a peasant, and turned him into a supreme military commander. He broke open closed markets to fuel commerce and trade. He was a pioneer who aggressively adopted Western technology like firearms and completely changed the old ways of war. But to his enemies, Nobunaga was a merciless demon king who showed no forgiveness to anyone who defied him, whether they were gods or Buddhas. He took tens of thousands of lives without hesitation, and a river of blood always flowed before him wherever he marched. Nobunaga was a man of contradictions who proved with his entire being that there can be no creation without destruction. He destroyed everything old to open a new era. His methods were brutal, but without him, the age of unification might have come much later. The name Oda Nobunaga remains forever in Japanese history as a symbol of both terror and awe, an eternal flame that will never be extinguished. Now, among the men captured by Akechi Mitsuhide's forces at Honnō-ji, there was one very unusual individual. His name was Yasuke, a black samurai. He was the first and only black man in Japanese history to be granted the status of samurai, and he is one of the figures who symbolize both Nobunaga's unconventional character and the tragedy of Honnō-ji. Yasuke had first arrived in Japan in 1579 as an enslaved bodyguard, serving the Jesuit missionary Alessandro Valignano. When Valignano visited Nobunaga, he brought Yasuke along. At the time, the Japanese people had never seen a black person before, and they were stunned by his towering height and immense strength. Nobunaga, a man who loved anything new and anyone with extraordinary ability, was absolutely captivated. He requested Valignano to let Yasuke stay, and he made Yasuke his own Kashin. Nobunaga gave him the Japanese name Yasuke, granted him the rank of samurai, and provided him with a private residence, a salary, and a sword. He made Yasuke a member of his personal bodyguard and his weapons bearer. In the rigid class-based society of Japan at the time, this was an absolutely unthinkable level of honor. When Akechi Mitsuhide's 13,000 troops stormed Honnō-ji, Yasuke fought to the very end, despite being hopelessly outnumbered. He was eventually captured. Everyone expected him to be executed, but Akechi Mitsuhide made a surprising decision. According to historical accounts, he looked at Yasuke and said something along these lines: "This black man is not Japanese and likely cannot understand our affairs. There is no reason to punish him. Send him to the Jesuit church." After that, there are no clear historical records of what happened to Yasuke. It is only speculated that he either left Japan and returned to his homeland or worked for missionaries elsewhere. Yasuke's existence tells us just how much of an unconventional and innovative figure Nobunaga truly was, a man who was never bound by custom. After burning Nobunaga to death at Honnō-ji, Akechi Mitsuhide immediately went after Nobunaga's heirs. Nobunaga's eldest son, Nobutada, was staying at a nearby temple called Myokakuji. In the Sengoku period, it was common practice for a daimyo and his heir to always stay in separate locations as a precaution against surprise attacks and other emergencies. When Nobutada learned that his father was in danger, he rushed toward Honnō-ji with his soldiers. Honnō-ji was already engulfed in a massive inferno that blackened the sky, and Akechi's army had surrounded it so tightly that not even an ant could get through. Nobutada's retainers desperately urged him to retreat east to Miki Castle and regroup for the future. If Nobutada had listened to them and retreated to Miki Castle, he could have saved his life and preserved the clan. But Nobutada refused. His father had just fallen at the hands of the enemy. As a son, he could not turn his back and flee. Nobutada chose Nijo Shingosho, another fortified residence that Nobunaga had built in Kyoto, as the place where he would fight and die. With only a few hundred soldiers, Nobutada made his last stand against Akechi's overwhelming forces at Nijo Shingosho. He personally stood on the walls and fired arrows at the enemy. But the sheer number of attackers was too great. The gates were smashed open. Akechi's soldiers poured into the compound. Just as his father had done, Nobutada walked into a burning chamber, locked the door behind him, and followed his father into death by committing seppuku. And just like that, the heir to the Oda clan was gone. Oda Nobutada was known to have strongly resembled his father in appearance and was also renowned for his outstanding ability. If he had survived, he would very likely have succeeded Nobunaga as the ruler of Japan. Fortunately, the second son, Oda Nobukatsu, and the third son, Oda Nobutaka, were in Osaka and Sakai preparing for military campaigns, so they escaped the attack. Additionally, Nobunaga's wife, concubines, and daughters were safe at Miki Castle, the heart of the Oda clan, and their lives were spared. But the tragedy of Nobutada, a son who chose to follow his father into death, marked the beginning of yet another age of chaos in the Sengoku period. Akechi Mitsuhide's targets did not end with Nobunaga. Tokugawa Ieyasu was also on his list. Ieyasu was sightseeing in the merchant city of Sakai. By his side were only a few dozen of his most trusted kashindan. As Nobunaga's most important ally, Ieyasu had now become the #1 target for Akechi Mitsuhide, who was trying to seize control of the realm. Every direction was already under Akechi Mitsuhide's control. Escaping this net and making it back to his home province of Mikawa with just a few dozen men was nearly impossible. Ieyasu was so desperate that he even considered committing seppuku to die with honor. But his kashindan desperately persuaded him otherwise, and Ieyasu made the decision to try to return to Mikawa. The main eastern highway, the Tokaido, was already crawling with Akechi's soldiers and bounty hunters, Ochimushagari, who were after the price on his head. So Ieyasu chose the most dangerous, lawless territory in all of Japan, the province of Iga, the legendary homeland of the ninja, as his escape route. Iga was a land where no daimyo's authority reached, an independent territory ruled by ninja clans. For outsiders, it was no different from a land of death. Ieyasu and his group disguised themselves as merchants and traveling peddlers to hide their identities. It was Hattori Hanzo, a ninja from Iga, serving Ieyasu, who stepped up and risked his life to secure a path for his lord. Using his old connections and mobilizing all his resources, Hanzo persuaded the ninja of Iga and the neighboring ninja of Koka to help. Around 200 ninja from Iga and Koka opened the way for Ieyasu's group, scouted for ambushes, and cut down enemies directly to protect them. There was no time to eat, no time to sleep. They crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and marched in a desperate sprint for survival. After surviving several near-death encounters, Ieyasu's group finally broke through the treacherous Iga Mountains, reached the coast of Ise Bay, boarded a small boat, and crossed the sea. Miraculously, Tokugawa Ieyasu made it back to his home province of Mikawa. The moment he returned, Ieyasu immediately began assembling an army to march against Akechi Mitsuhide. This was a golden opportunity for Ieyasu to become the most powerful man in Japan. But there was someone else who had the same ambition and was moving even faster. That man was Hashiba Hideyoshi. If you enjoyed this episode of our Sengoku series, a like helps it reach more history fans. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next battle. And let me know in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.